right, there we go. Let's give Shelby just a minute to get our live stream up and rolling. And while Shelby is doing that, I also am going to pull our live stream up here so that I can see if our live stream folks have questions. So pardon me while I balance technology here. While I'm doing that, I think I got to many of you as you were walking in, but there are pieces of paper and pens in the back if you think you have a question that you would rather write down than ask out loud. You're welcome to do that, and at any point, if you want me to come and grab it, just wave it. But I also have a microphone that we can share questions and answers to. This isn't meant to be anything other than informal, conversational, and hopefully amenable to all of us together as a community. So, I'm getting my Facebook refreshed here. Haha, Facebook tells me Linworth is live. It's like the Matrix when you watch yourself on the live stream. It's amazing. Let me just make it so I can see comments, and then we should be ready to roll. So I used to, in the beginning of the pandemic, I used to sit with my laptop as there were like 6 of us in the space, but I've been doing it on my phone, so I'm very used to Facebook on my phone, and I'm looking at the Facebook update here, and I don't really know where the comments are. So give me just a second to, there we go. Oh, hi, Sue, Pastor Jean, Pastor Brooke, we're all here. All right, so I think most of you know me, but in case you don't in this space or if you're online, I'm Pastor Anna. I have the privilege of being one of your pastors here, the senior pastor. I'm appointed here along with Pastor Sarah McSwords, Pastor Jean Folden, and Pastor Brooke Hilliard. So we 4 are very happy to report that after this last annual conference, each of us has been reappointed to serve here for the year. So unless Bishop Palmer throws us a major curveball, here we are. You are all very generous when you clap in that way. I'll say in my experience in ministry that it's pretty common for folks who are younger and newer in their ministry to hop appointments with more frequency. And so my hope is to be at Linworth longer than I've been anywhere. And this is the year that ties me. So hopefully I've got at least 2 more years here. And if you all see fit, hopefully much, much longer. My answer to everybody is we bought a house. We're not going anywhere. So that's the answer to that. So this year we have had annual conference was held virtually again during the pandemic. Many annual conferences were in person, and it was very strange to see some of my colleagues throughout the Connection gathering in person with their annual conferences together. I had a little bit of FOMO, which is fear of missing out, if you need the definition, as everybody else got together. Because one of the ways that in the potential turmoil of annual conference that we are refreshed and renewed through that is through the collegiality of people that we've loved and cared for through the years and get to see. But when you're just staring at a Zoom screen, you don't get to see them. And the chat is turned off, so you don't even get to chat with them. So in turn, what happens is what happened in my office, where I have my laptop with the main screen, I have another window open with the voting screen, and I've got like 18 text message threads going with various groupings of my colleagues and friends in our annual conference. So it becomes a little technologically exhausting. So before we go any further, let me stop and offer a word of prayer for our conversation tonight, and then I'll share a little bit of how we'll proceed. So, God, we thank you this night for bringing us together through all of the journeys of our lives to bring us to this place that is called Linworth United Methodist Church. We thank you for the way that you have shaped us and molded us to follow in the footsteps of Jesus, and we ask nothing more this evening than to follow Jesus more closely. We ask that you would open our hearts to grant us patience and discernment for the information we hear, for the questions we ask. And we ask that you would pour out a spirit of openness in this space. And for those watching online, that we would all be mindful of the ways that you have called us each to love one another. We pray this all in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. see. Pastor Jean was saying somebody. Okay, we have Pastor Jean helping somebody on our live stream. Wonderful. Thank you, Pastor Jean. So how I'd like to proceed tonight is for us to just have conversation at any time. If you need me to stop and define a term or clarify a thing, please just wave your hand and we'll do that. Again, at any time, if you have a question or a comment that you'd like to submit on paper, just wave it and I'll come and get it from you. If you have my cell phone number, please feel free to text. If you're watching on the live stream, you can comment from the chat thread, or I believe that I'll get a real-time message from you if you message the Linworth United Methodist Church account, but maybe Shelby will help me keep my eyes on that to make sure I don't miss anything. And thank you, Shelby, for being here tonight, facilitating our live stream and handling our sound needs, as always. So, here are a couple of general caveats that I want to share before we go further. So if you will remember from your United Methodist history education, whether it was here or elsewhere, the United Methodist Church as a denomination really has only been in existence since 1968. There are a lot of streamlined denominational pipelines which brought us together. But in 1968, the United Methodist Church was a merger of the Evangelical United Brethren Church and the Methodist Episcopal Church. And why are you telling us this, Pastor Anna? That's really boring. All of that is to say, there have been a few narratives recently of let's keep the United in United Methodist. And while I believe in that, when I say I believe in that, I take it to remember that united, in this case, in our denominational name, is a proper noun. It's not an adjective. So it's not so much that we are meant to be all together, although I believe we are, but united is part of the name of one of our predecessor denominations, not a statement of our unity. So just keep that rolling in your mind. And in fact, I was sharing with Matthew, our business manager, when we were youth annual conference delegates, when Bishop Judy Craig was our bishop, she used to have a Methodist jar on the dais at annual conference, and while she was presiding, if you ever said just Methodist, she would make you put money in the United Methodist jar because you had left off the United. Because there are many clergy still around today and in active and retired ministry that served in our predecessor denomination. So when you just say Methodist, you're like lopping off of half of our denomination's history. So keep that in mind. United is not necessarily an adjective. It's a proper noun. So that's the first caveat. My second caveat is I try always to, and sometimes I fail in this, but I try my best to always just give information as much as information can be given, but sometimes there comes a point where I can no longer give that information without my own opinions and stances coloring what I'm going to say, and I try my best always to give the disclaimer. This is Pastor Anna talking, not strict fact. So I will try my very best to always give disclaimers when those things come up, because they will come up. Related to that, I'm going to take some liberties tonight, and I know that the language of us and them is not always helpful. But the reason I will choose us and them language is because from my own personal experience in advocacy work, I'll just claim I have been active in the Reconciling Ministries Network for a long while. Linworth United Methodist Church is a Reconciling United Methodist Church. And while I believe the language of us and them is not always helpful, it becomes default sometimes. And so again, I'm gonna try to be respectful of both us, which means the moderate to progressive side of things, and them meaning the conservative side. But no, there's not a clear-cut line between like us over here and them over here. It's not always that simple, but if I refer to us and them, please grant me a little bit of grace because it's default for me. But again, that's Pastor Anna talking, not strictly informational. So, with those disclaimers, depending on how much you have been following happenings within the United Methodist Church, it is most easy and clear-cut to say right now that we are on the verge of a schism. And a schism is a really big word. And if you would have asked me 4, even 6 years ago, I would have said that I believed that the schism in the United Methodist Church would really be a fork in the road, where nobody was happy with what was happening and both parties would choose different paths forward. The way our life together as a denomination looks right now is it does not appear that there will be a clear fork. It appears that there will be a majority, and by that I don't mean numerical majority, but I mean sort of a trajectory of those who stay within the United Methodist Church, and then it appears that there will also be a fracture, a splinter, if you will, in the launch of the Global Methodist Church. Now, that is to say, there could be the possibility of a smaller splinter or fracture on the far left as well. There are some folks in the very, very progressive world who are rumbling about forming their own very progressive, liberation-based denomination. There's not been such strategic organizing on that front that I'm aware of. So the Global Methodist Church is organized, it's articulated, they have a website, a transitional leadership team, statements of polity and beliefs, all these things. So the Global Methodist Church has officially launched. It's a real thing. And so the reason we waited to have this conversation tonight was because we wanted to wait until after the West Ohio Annual Conference because we have more information now on what it will look like for churches and for clergy within the West Ohio Conference who choose to disaffiliate with the United Methodist Church and affiliate themselves with the Global Methodist Church. So there's like 18 places to go here. Mostly on the surface, if you ask anybody on any side of this whole situation, we're fighting over issues of human sexuality. But I want to read a quote from a book called Entangled, and as soon as my screensaver turns off here, this book, Entangled, is written by Ashley Bogendreff. And so she writes, and I quote, "For the past 46 years, United Methodists have placed sexuality as the primary lens through which they have discerned how to be in ministry with one another and the world. The way United Methodists understand sexuality has affected the denomination's history, doctrine, polity, mission, and evangelism." And all that is to say, yes, we are in conflict over views of human sexuality, but that's the surface level. We're really also trying to wrestle with some of our theological positions, like the authority of Scripture. We're trying to figure out our ecclesiological positions, like orders of ministry and criteria for ordination. We are arguing about money, about power, about property. So on the surface, there's conflict about human sexuality, but underneath the surface are all the real problems. And so what I want you to hear in that, more than anything, is I am keenly aware that when we say that we are fighting over the issue of human sexuality, these are the lives of people. There are people impacted. There are people who are being hurt by the church in all sides. It's not one group of people doing the hurting. So when we're arguing about property, there's people. When we're arguing about ordination, it impacts people. When we're arguing about money and mission, it's people on the line. And so if you take one thing out of this room tonight, it is that more than anything, we want to care for people here at Linworth. We want to keep people in relationship with Jesus Christ. That's our primary purpose. So, if you will recall, there was a special session of the General Conference in St. Louis in 19 years in the pre-pandemic are rolling together. That special session of the General Conference was called for the sole and express purpose of talking about human sexuality and the ways that it impacts our denomination. And similarly, It was meant to be the General Conference that laid out the path forward for people to leave, for people and local congregations to leave the denomination. It didn't happen the way that anybody hoped, but that's the beauty of our General Conference. And just a reminder, General Conference is the only body that can speak on behalf of the whole of the United Methodist Church, which is why, as the Global Methodist Church launches, you're not hearing responses to that officially from the United Methodist Church because the General Conference hasn't met. It's been postponed twice now. And just in full disclosure, I am a voting delegate to the General Conference if we ever get to have it. And if they keep the same delegation. I was elected for the 2020 General Conference, and I've never voted on General Conference matters under that election because it hasn't happened. So we're like the delegation that wasn't. What they might do, we're not sure yet, is they might throw all the delegates out and ask every annual conference to re-elect their delegates. And if that's the case, I don't know if I'll be a delegate again or not. So. The main thrust of what came out of that special session of the General Conference was a brand new paragraph to the Book of Discipline. And again, just to define some terms, the Book of Discipline is the set of rules that we all live by. Previously, before that special session of General Conference, there was one paragraph about the way that a church could disaffiliate within the United Methodist Church. And that paragraph, if you're taking notes, is 2548.2. What we did was we added a paragraph, which was 2553, that added some criteria for how a church can disaffiliate from the United Methodist Church. Now, why is all of that important? Well, because there's a thing in the United Methodist Church called the Trust Clause. Have you guys heard of the Trust Clause? Anybody? Okay, a few hands. So we'll take Linworth, for example. Within the Trust Clause, though you, very dear saints at Linworth, raised the funds, built this building, own the land legally, sort of, really, this building and the land is held in trust for the United Methodist Church. So if, hypothetically, Linworth United Methodist Church decided to, leave the United Methodist Church and join the Church of Starbucks, you could all get your vote together, you could choose to leave, but before the special annual conference, or General Conference, what would happen is you all would get to go start your own church, but you don't get to take this church building or the land with you. So that becomes problematic for folks who decide they want to leave because they are more traditionalist in their views of human sexuality, marriage, ordination, things like that, because they have churches, they have resources, they have buildings, and if they would disaffiliate, they believe that they are entitled to taking their building and their property with them. You can decide how you feel about that on your own. So this new paragraph made a provision for them to do so, and again, by them, in this case, I mean the Global Methodist Church, but also potential fractures on the far left as well. There are certain criteria that will need to be met in order for them to take their building and property with them. So basically, it is releasing them of the trust clause so that they can go and take their buildings. And those things are things like they have a time limit by which they can make this decision. I'll read that part of the paragraph to you. The choice by a local church to disaffiliate with the United Methodist Church under this paragraph shall be made in sufficient time for the process for exiting the denomination to be complete prior to December 31st, 2023. The provisions of paragraph 2553 expire on December 31st, 2023, and shall not be used after that date. So it puts a timestamp on your congregation needs to decide whether you're staying or going by this date. It also says that there's a decision-making process in which you would make those choices. So the church conference shall be conducted in accordance with another paragraph of the discipline, 248, and shall be held within 120 days after the district superintendent calls for the church conference. I'm summarizing here. The decision to disaffiliate from the United Methodist Church must be approved by a 2/3 majority of the vote of professing members of the local church present at the church conference. There is more about the way to disaffiliate, but there are some criteria then that would need to be met if you achieve that numerical vote. The local church shall pay any unpaid apportionments for the 12 months prior to the disaffiliation, as well as an additional 12 months of apportionments. So apportionments, if you recall, some people call them the church tax. I take issue with that for a lot of reasons. I think of it more as connectional giving, or the way that a church tithes to the denomination to support the mission and ministry of the church, but that's a hobby horse for another day. But there are congregations on both sides of the theological aisle, if you will, that have chosen to not pay their apportionments for various reasons. So under this clause, a church would need to pay 12 months previous and 12 months in advance. They would also have the right to retain its real and personal, tangible and intangible property. All transfers of property shall be made prior to the disaffiliation. All costs for transfer of title and other legal work shall be borne by the disaffiliating church. And then there is a big piece about the pension liabilities. And I'm just going to read it to you. And again, sorry if it's boring, but it's important. The local church shall contribute withdrawal liability in an amount equal to its pro rata share of any aggregate unfunded pension obligations to the annual conference. The General Board of Pensions and Health Benefits shall determine the aggregate funding obligations of the annual conference using market factors similar to commercial annuity provider, from which the annual conference will determine the local church's share. So let me pull up a different document here. And while I'm doing that, let me share with you that I happen to also have the great privilege of chairing the West Ohio Conference Board of Pension and Health Benefit, which keeps my life really interesting these days. So let's take Linworth for example. And I'm trying to find the numbers. We ran our hypothetical numbers. Now remember, these numbers change every time the market changes of what the numbers are. So I'm just going to give you the most recent, as I'm scrolling through my document. So for all of those monetary figures that I just told you, for Linworth to disaffiliate, if we would, it would cost us $485,000 payout. So we would need to essentially write a check to the West Ohio Annual Conference for $485,000 to be able to take this building and property and leave. Okay? So I want to stop right here and see if there are any questions, and then I'll keep talking. Yeah. And if it's okay, since there are so few of us, if we can just ask our questions, and then I'll repeat it so that folks on the live stream can hear it, unless you'd rather me pass the handheld. Correct, but so Eileen's question was, we would stay, right? That's the basic question. Linworth would stay, right? Yes, but that comes with a big assumption, and that assumption is the Global Methodist Church, which is the articulated offshoot denomination, has articulated more traditional understandings of human sexuality, and as a reconciling United Methodist Church, we can assume though you all know what happens when you assume, we can assume that even if we would call for that vote, which I don't believe that we would, but if we would call for that vote to disaffiliate, I would assume that we would not garner a 2/3 vote to go and join the Global Methodist Church. So that's the assumption. But if a church doesn't call for this vote and does nothing going forward, yes, we stay United Methodist at this juncture, in this trajectory. So that was a great question. Thank you, Eileen. Yeah.
For a church who votes and decides to disaffiliate, what happens to the clergy that are appointed at that point? Is that their choice to go to the global church, or stay with the United Methodist Church, or go to the ever-loving Freedom Loving? What happens to the clergy?
That's a great question. The question is, if a local congregation chooses to disaffiliate, what happens to the pastor? Well, the pastor would decide for themselves whether they would also disaffiliate or whether they would re-enter the appointment pool within their annual conference. So if you will recall, Linworth United Methodist Church is your church. When I was ordained, my membership in the United Methodist Church no longer is in a local congregation. I am not a member of a local church. I am a member of the West Ohio Annual Conference. So again, and this is a big hypothetical, I'm just using Linworth's name because we're sitting here. If Linworth would choose to disaffiliate, and I didn't want to go with you, then I would call Bishop Palmer and say, you need to find me another church because Linworth's going haywire. So there are things that clergy need to consider in the midst of that disaffiliation. Some of it's health insurance. Some of it is your retirement. And for clergy who are already retired, right now, a retired clergy person can already disaffiliate. However, it's not clear anywhere in any annual conference what happens to a retiree's health care if they disaffiliate. And that is one of the biggest questions. So we'll take Joe Smith, who faithfully served the EUB church and then retired from the United Methodist Church in 2010. But Joe Smith is really conservative, goes to the Global Methodist Church. Is he still entitled to health care under the United Methodist retirement plans when he's not a United Methodist clergy person anymore? That's the big question. And related, that's why the unfunded pension liability is such a big portion, because you all, in participating in this denomination, have made a pledge, not only to me, not only to Pastor Sarah or Pastor Jean or Pastor Brooke or Pastor Graham or Pastor Raylan, like whatever pastors have been here, you have made a commitment to supporting all of the pastors in the West Ohio Conference in their retirement. And so if you pull out of the denomination, you need to make good on those promises that you have made for your pension liability. And this is my bias as the chair of the pensions team. Pay up. You can't leave the pension pool unfunded, because that's shifty, I think. But that's also because I would like to retire someday, and I would like to have some retirement. Within West Ohio, we've heard narratives over the last 4 or 5 years that our pension is fully funded, and that's true with a couple of caveats. It's funded fully with the number of participants in the plan and with the number of churches contributing and with current market performance. Well, if you have a TV and half a brain, you know that the market is not going to keep going up. And if people begin to pull out of making pension payments, then the future liability is not fully funded. So that's why you need to, if you choose to disaffiliate, your congregation will need to fulfill your unfunded pension liability to make sure that that pension is no longer in the air, if that makes sense. Other questions? Well, do you all want me to tell you about West Ohio legislation this last time? Yeah, okay, there's one head nodding, so okay. There were a few pieces of legislation that were, they are all notable. One is the budget, one is the conference rules, which includes clergy vacation policies, all of these things. The notable pieces of legislation, I would say, germane to this conversation tonight are recommendation number 6, which was an aspirational piece of legislation from the General Conference delegates in West Ohio, and it was meant to say that the West Ohio Conference supports the next General Conference delegates from West Ohio in voting for plans that bring about a grace-filled, amicable separation. So don't go fighting tooth and nail, try to maintain grace in the breakup process. That's what legislation number 6 said, and it passed. There was a piece of legislation, recommendation number 7, which was written by a small group of progressive clergy, myself included. I was a signer on this piece, that was meant to urge the district committees on ministry and the board of ordained ministry to regard candidates for ministry without consideration of their sexuality. And the reason that this one piece was written, because there is one candidate in West Ohio that we know of who has been denied her commissioning twice for the sole purpose of, or for the sole reason of her being married to a woman. The first time she was turned down, they cited that as a reason and some other theological growing edges. When she came back to the team, they said to her, "We think that you are a great candidate for ministry. We believe that you're called, but we can't vote for you because you're married to a woman." And that's the only reason they voted her down. So recommendation number 7 was meant to say, regard all of the candidates without considering their sexual orientation. And that failed by like 38 votes, which is sad in some way, but for those of us who supported the recommendation, it was also encouraging because it lost by a very small margin, all things considered, which has not always been the case for recommendations of similar purpose. So you kind of have to look for the sunshine in the midst of what I consider to be a dark cloud. And again, remember, these are people's lives, people's well-beings, people's calls to ministry that we're talking about. So, and then there was recommendation number 8. Now, if you think that my conversation earlier about the 2 separate paragraphs under which a church could disaffiliate, this is why it's important. So the annual conference trustees report laid out basically, in West Ohio, the process for disaffiliating will be 2553, the new paragraph. If Linworth United Methodist Church decides to disaffiliate, this is the process to do it, with the points that I've just outlined for you. Recommendation number 8 basically was asking for churches who choose to disaffiliate to use the old paragraph instead of the new paragraph. And why does that matter? Well, it matters because under the old paragraph, if the Global Methodist Church would be named as another pan-Methodist or evangelical denomination that is recognized, then they could leave having just their title transferred over to them. No shoring up their apportionment payments, no caring for their unfunded pension liabilities. Just take your building and go. Have a nice life. We know that you want to be gone. We want you to be gone. Just go. We didn't vote on recommendation number 8 because what happened was a clergy person asked from the floor, the virtual floor of the annual conference, that Bishop Palmer issue a rule of law on recommendation number 8. And I've been serving as a delegate to a member of annual conference since I was 12 years old. That's the first time I've ever asked or heard a rule of law be asked for at an annual conference. So Bishop Palmer was asked to immediately rule if he believed that that legislation, that recommendation, was in alignment with our book of discipline. He did make a ruling, and he said that he believes that there are pieces which are out of alignment with the Book of Discipline, which means he threw it out. But there are two caveats that come with that. He now has 30 days to basically write a position paper on why he believes it to be in violation of the discipline, and it automatically gets sent to our judicial council for review. So whether Bishop Palmer was right, wrong, or indifferent in making his ruling, the judicial council will now automatically review that legislation, which I think is a good thing. It kind of takes Bishop Palmer off the hook. It sets the precedent for other annual conferences who might be trying to do the same. So we didn't vote on recommendation 8. Then conversely, what happened is after number 8 was thrown out, then another clergy person asked Bishop Palmer for a rule of law over the conference trustees report, which is using the new paragraph for disaffiliating. And Bishop Palmer said, again, I have 30 days to make my ruling. I will take the full 30 days. He did not issue an initial rule of law over that, so we don't know what he's going to say. But again, he has 30 days to release his statement, and it automatically gets sent to the Judicial Council for review. So what that means for us in West Ohio is kind of think of it like the Supreme Court in the US. Like once the Judicial Council rules on it, that's kind of it. So we're going to know which paragraph those churches who choose to affiliate with the Global Methodist Church and disaffiliate with the United Methodist Church will know which paragraph they have to use in a perfect world. Does it make sense? What other questions do you have? Yeah. Yep. Correct. Recap. We've been arguing over human sexuality since 1972. So if you remember, we merged in 1968. 1972 was the first time that any language about homosexuality was added into United Methodist polity. So very shortly after the birth of this denomination, bam, there's language in our discipline. So in 1972, let me pull up the exact language so I don't get it wrong here. Scrolling. In 1972, the initial phrasing was proposed. Homosexual persons, no less than heterosexual persons, are individuals of sacred worth. And originally, that's where it ended. However, at the General Conference at the time, a delegate from Southwest Texas amended and then turned that period into a comma, followed by the phrase, though we do not condone the practice of homosexuality and consider this practice incompatible with Christian doctrine. So that's immediately where this incompatibility language was born into our denomination. And there are a few places in our Book of Discipline currently where this language is still found. So you'll hear in one place, human sexuality is God's gift to all people. Lovely, that's probably accurate. But then in another place, it says that we believe that homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. And so how do you hold these two things together? It also says, as far as ordination is concerned, that a person who is a self-avowed practicing homosexual may not be ordained. And I ran that phrase together on purpose because there's a really important comma that is absent, because the way our discipline reads now, a person must be self-avowed practicing. There's no comma. It's not self-avowed comma practicing. It's self-avowed practicing, which is why in the case of the one woman who has been denied her commissioning, she's being denied because she's married. She's practicing. Like, what does practicing mean, really? But there are openly gay clergy members who are, obviously they're gay, but they're not practicing, they're not married, they're not in a relationship, or they have not disclosed that relationship through the real channels. And if you're asking yourself, how within our book of discipline can there be such conflict between one paragraph and the other? Well, that's a polity question. So at General Conference, we'll just take paragraph 12, because that's my favorite number. So if paragraph 12 in a perfect world is like the purple carpet paragraph, this is the example I always use. So, Denny, as a member of a local congregation, feels very strongly about purple carpet, but our current discipline says, paragraph 12 says, all carpet in local United Methodist churches shall be red. Well, Denny, as a member of a local church, can propose to the General Conference that we change that paragraph, strike the word red, and insert the word purple. Okay, cool. Everybody's going to have an opinion on that. Once Denny has submitted anything to paragraph 12, it now means paragraph 12 is open for the editing. So once it's on the floor of General Conference, then Tim might say, well, carpet is dumb. I propose that everything be hardwood. But because the paragraph is open, we can edit the entirety of that paragraph. Now, if later in the discipline in paragraph 276.4, it talks about the way that the trustees have to vote on flooring, that paragraph isn't open because we haven't opened that paragraph legislatively. And so we could make a change saying all churches have to be hardwood over here, when over in this paragraph it says the trustees have to have a 2/3 vote to approve carpet. And so you've got carpet conversation over here, hardwood conversation over here, and now you have two pieces of the discipline that don't agree. Does that make sense? So that's kind of how we got ourselves where we are. But I'm going to venture to say that every General Conference since 1972, there has been proposed language changes around this incompatibility language, and it's never passed. It's gotten very close, but it's never passed. Is that helpful? Oh, sure. But if you're asking the question, somebody else probably is thinking it. Yeah. Great question. Thank you for clarifying. Tim is asking me to clarify, when we say human sexuality, where is the problem? And again, that's my phrasing of Tim's question, not Tim's words. It's twofold. It's marriage. So can we, as a clergy person, am I permitted to marry a same-gender couple? And it is also our ordination. Are we permitted to ordain gay people? So it's marriage and ordination, twofold. I would venture to say that there is not a single United Methodist Church, at least in the United States. There might be some in our global church that have different ideas. No United Methodist Church is going to kick somebody out who walks in and discloses they're gay. That's my hope, my most genuine hope. Even my most conservative colleagues, who I consider dear friends, they would not kick a gay person out of their church explicitly. But then the question becomes, when that gay person has made their faith home, whatever congregation, brings their new partner and says, Pastor Anna, can you marry us? Right now, the answer is no. Technically, according to our book of discipline, I'm not permitted to marry same-gender couples. And more broadly, one of the challenges is it's such a narrow definition of human sexuality because it's only talking about same-gender relationships. It's not taking into consideration people who are transgender. It's not taking into consideration people who identify as non-binary, people who are non-binary. And as people choose to, as people are aware of the language with which they identify more fully, the church is still fighting over language from 1972. And it's important because we can't figure out what we're fighting about in 2022 until we've figured out our 1972 language. But it's such a narrow problem to be thinking of like just same-gender weddings. Is that more helpful? Thank you. Great question. Yeah. That's a great question. As I understand, if the Judicial Council rules that we would fall under 2553, which I think is what's going to happen, it would take a charge conference vote. So basically, administrative council would need to call the district superintendent and say, we think we want to have a vote. The district superintendent would authorize a church conference for that vote, and then we would move forward in that way. But the language is very explicit about persons who are present and voting. So there wouldn't be the ability to like mail in an opinion, email about it. It would need to be people who are in person and have official membership within a local congregation. Correct. But remember, for us to be a reconciling congregation, that's affiliating with a caucus group. So, I mean, while the Reconciling Ministries Network has criteria that they hope that you fulfill in order to identify as a reconciling United Methodist Church, all things considered, we're no different than any other United Methodist Church, reconciling or not, according to our official organizing. We just have chosen by our vote to affiliate with this caucus group. Yeah. What other questions do you have? Sure. That's a great question. Tim's question was if what we know to be the fullness of what it means to be United Methodist in 96 points, if points 1 through 95 are the same for both the Global Methodist Church and the United Methodist Church, but 96 is 96 the only outlier. And there's one distinction I would like to make. In the example you gave, you used the phrase, in the United Methodist Church, we would marry gay people if everything plays out the way it's looking like it will. No clergy person is going to be forced or required to marry same-gender couples. I mean, right now, any person who comes to me, any straight couple, because that's technically the only people I'm allowed to marry, which I have lots of questions. Like, do I ask everybody, like, are you all straight? Nobody's bisexual, right? Like, it's challenging and pastorally very awkward. I don't have to marry anybody that I don't care to marry. And that will remain true in the United Methodist Church, which is important because there are, it's not an official group, but there's like a lot of talk about the two sides, but in the middle is this like moderate majority middle. People who just want to be able to live into ministry in the ways that they feel authentic. And so it could mean that, Pastor Joe Smith, who's brand new to ministry, still doesn't feel comfortable marrying same-gender people, but still is very much United Methodist. Joe Smith doesn't have to marry same-gender people. It would be that in the Global Methodist Church, that would be an explicit prohibition. And similarly, and I don't know the answer to this fully, but I think their articulation of standards for ordination will be more in alignment with self-avowed and less leaning on the practicing. So anybody who would self-disclose as gay would then not be permitted for ordination, if that makes sense. Does it make sense? It's a little nuanced because the Global Methodist Church is still trying to figure a lot of stuff out. I mean, they're really well organized, and again, hear me saying they, because I'm not a part of that organizing. They have a transitional book of discipline. It's all online. You can read it. But in practicality, it's things like, what does itineration look like? Are there appointments guaranteed? And if that's a phrase that you've never heard of before, I'm guaranteed my appointment, not my appointment at Linworth UMC, but I'm guaranteed an appointment within the United Methodist Church by virtue of my ordination. They're still trying to figure out, are they going to roll with guaranteed appointment? Are they going to maintain an itinerant system where an Episcopal leader appoints them places? There's just a lot of questions we don't know. But what we're hearing articulated is that they hope to maintain missional relationships. They hope to maintain many of our theological foundations. So while on the surface level, the answer might be yes, 96 is the only point that's different, when we're living in that post-split world, we might find that like item 13.4 is different, but it's a lived difference and not a clearly articulated difference. Let me check in on my live stream here. Give me 1 second, Tom, and we'll come right to you. I'm reading a comment. Thank you for being patient. So, and Tom, I'm coming to you. The thrust of a question on our live stream is, how do we move beyond this obvious collision course of failure to attract this younger generation who must be shaking their heads at us? It's a great question, but I want to be clear that not every young person is liberal in matters of human sexuality. I think overarchingly, yes, there's probably more people who are young who are open to same-gender marriages in church settings, but that's not universally true. One of the lay people that I was raised with, she's the same age as me. We got married the same year. We had kids together. Like, we're pretty much peers in this life. She is very conservative, and she does not believe that in the church there should be same-gender marriages. Now, I think legally she would advocate for equal rights for all people, but she would say not in the church, just at the courthouse. So, Ken, when you ask the question, I don't know the answer to that necessarily, but Tom, you had a question as well?
I guess this may count as a curiosity.
Okay.
And I guess I'm asking what you have heard. That the last time when General Conference got together and took this vote, whether the human sexuality references should be taken out of our book of discipline or not, that was defeated by a small majority, much of which came from foreign countries, not from the United States, because the United Methodist Church is a worldwide church. Have you heard whether any of these other nation churches in other nations, are they looking to the global Methodist Church, or is that?
Yeah, the curiosity that was articulated is let me try to summarize, is the tension over human sexuality globally held, and are there folks in not United States context, United Methodist congregations, who are looking to the GMC for leadership? And the answer is yes, there are lots of places in our connectional system that are taking their cues from Global Methodist Church leadership. But there are very many people and conferences outside of the United States who are not taking their cues from the Global Methodist. Like there are conferences in Europe who have very openly said that they are disavowing the Global Methodist Church movement. They don't agree with it. They intend to stay United Methodist. But there are plenty of conferences who, we get a sense, plan on leaving to affiliate with the Global Methodist Church. So it's not as clear cut. as saying yes or no. But that's the beauty and the challenge of being a global denomination, is that, when we're on the floor at General Conference and the voting ratio is proportional to our membership, then that means sometimes the majority votes come from annual conferences outside of the United States. And so this is Anna's editorial aside. Yes, if the United States was just voting on this issue, we would have been more completely through with this issue than we are now, but we don't. That's not the way our polity works. So we just have to kind of figure it out. And I do want to say we are approaching the hour, so if anybody needs to head out, please know that I won't be offended if you head out, but I'm here for sharing as much information as you all would have me share. So I just want to draw your attention to that. I can find the statistics for you, but I don't know it off the top of my head. Delegation-wise, like voting members to General Conference, there's been sort of a jockeying between the two biggest annual conferences, and by big, I mean people-wise, not geographically. It's been between the North Georgia Annual Conference and the Ivory Coast in Africa that have been, I think for like the last 10 or 12 years, have been just swapping as the biggest numerical delegations. But I don't know globally the ratio. What I do know for sure, though, is that the United Methodist Church in the United States is in decline, and on the continent of Africa, it's on the incline. In the Philippines, it's in the incline. In Europe, it's kind of like, who knows? So I don't know the exact ratios off the top of my head, but I'll see if I can find it. Other questions, thoughts, ponderances and confusions? Let me check in on my live stream while you're all thinking here. And let me just say, again, to Ken's comment on our live stream, Ken noted declining numbers in not only, I'm going to assume, Ken, you mean not only Linworth, but also other United Methodist congregations. And I listened to a podcast between Bishop Palmer and two other bishops talking with Nadia Boltz-Weber today. And you've all heard me quote her a million times, I'm sure. But she talked about it in, she articulated it like painting the phone booth. And by that, she meant we don't use phone booths anymore. Young people carry cell phones. And so the church basically is saying, young people are using their cell phones. Maybe if we paint the phone booth, they're going to come back to the phone booth. Well, they're not. Like culturally, even those of you who are more generationally blessed than I am, like you're not going to use a phone booth. You've probably got a cell phone too. You might engage with it differently, but painting the phone booth doesn't do any good. So in church world, why are we looking at the ways that culturally people are interacting with the message of Jesus Christ and saying we need to fix something outdated and hope people are coming back, if that makes sense? And so that podcast, if you want to listen to it, it's posted on the West Ohio Conference website. It's Bishop Palmer's new project called The Unfinished Church. And I've only listened to that one first episode, but they've posted a few more episodes since then. I'm just a little behind on it. Other questions, ponderances? Oh, I'm here for it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so Tim's question was on the other issues that are important to Tim or Pastor Anna or any other individual, will any other hot button issues continue to be the same in each subsequent iteration of Methodist Life Together, or will they be different? And the answer is simply, we don't know. We know that the way that the United Methodist Church will remain is that our social principles will be the place where we look for cues on that, but our social principles are not held in our United Methodist discipline. And so the United Methodist stance on abortion, it's not doctrine for us, so you can disagree with it and still in good faith call yourself United Methodist. The same way with like gun control or the right to protest, even things like wind energy. Like we have statements on all of these things, but they're not held within our discipline. And so the difference is human sexuality resides within our discipline. And so we don't know, and maybe the Global Methodist Church does know this, and I just don't know because I'm not involved in their organizing work. We don't know what they're going to do with the social principles. Will they adopt them and then amend them for themselves? Will they throw it out and not use them at all? I just don't know the answers to those questions. Yes?
How does all of this outside work affect the fact that we are embarking on a program of visioning and new statements within our own congregation?
That's a great question. The question is, as we embark in a season of visioning work, direction setting, dreaming, and reevaluating our statements of mission, vision, and values, how does all of this sort of bigger denominational stuff impact our life together? And again, the answer is a little nuanced, but one of the things that in the initial phases of this that was frustrating to many people was that conference leaders were saying, in the midst of all of this conflict, just stay on point, stay on mission, stay on vision, do your own thing, don't let the arguing halt you from doing mission in the name of Jesus Christ in your local congregation. And that was frustrating for me in the beginning. But what I've taken that to mean is, for now, we are a reconciling congregation that has an articulated statement of inclusion, and for us, staying on mission, staying faithful to the call of Jesus Christ for us at Linworth United Methodist Church means, right now, being true to those statements. Now, as we articulate whether we believe them to be fully realized or still aspirational, or if we need to revise them and say something different, that will be fine. So I know that's not like the most conclusive answer to your question, but we are going to keep doing what we believe God has called us to at Linworth United Methodist Church until God directs us otherwise. And the reason I say God directs us otherwise, again, is because this is your congregation. And I have a lot of opinions. I have my own hopes. But ultimately, my job here is not to bring Linworth United Methodist Church into my own dream of fully realized life in Jesus Christ. Cool if it aligns that way, and part of the reason I was appointed here is because I suspect that many of those points converge. However, to go back to my carpet versus hardwood analogy, like if I want hardwood and you all want carpet, the reality is if I push you all to have hardwood, you're going to be ticked off because you have hardwood, and then Bishop Palmer's going to move me. So not only have I, blown all of my leadership capital to make you get hardwood, but now I'm gone and you have flooring you don't like. So for me to push Linworth into a certain identity is not necessarily helpful. I'm just here as your leader in this season to help you all discern what you believe God wants for us at Linworth United Methodist Church. And does that mean that sometimes my opinions from the pulpit make people bristle? Absolutely. I've been emailing with a dear member just today about making a statement on the resurrection, that my own opinion came through very, very strongly. And I'm not going to change my own opinion, but I will say that the way that I characterized a global Methodist Church opinion on the resurrection might not have been fully accurate. But for me, that was my perception, that's my lived reality, so I can share it, and I just have to be diligent in saying, like, this is my opinion, which is to circle back to the very beginning. That's my job, is to say, this is my opinion, but here's as much information as I can give you. Make the choices that are good for you as a congregation, knowing that this is your church, not mine, if that's helpful. So again, Debbie, I'm sorry, that's not the most conclusive answer to your question, but it's something. You guys don't want to know how many vacation Sundays they gave us in our rules report? Because we fight about that a lot, and I'm not joking. We fight about clergy vacation a lot. The annual conference. And what it means, we joke about it, but what it means is most often folks who are quarreling about clergy vacation, it's demonstrating a supreme lack of mistrust between a pastor and a local congregation. Because like at Linworth, our SPRC, thankfully, has never ever asked for an accounting of my time off. Now, I keep a spreadsheet, and if they would ask me, I could send it to them tomorrow. But they trust that I'm stewarding my vacation well. I trust that they're giving me all of the vacation that I've been afforded, and great, we trust each other. So at Linworth, we don't argue about these things. But in the annual conference, oh man, we love to argue about, now, does your 21 days of vacation include all Sundays, or is it only 4 Sundays? And does your Sabbath day count as a vacation day, or is that free time off? Like, it's comical and a little sad all at the same time. So.
One last question.
Sure.
I'm going to speak on behalf of the church.
You're brave.
I'm going to raise that banner.
Okay.
What can we as the church body do tangibly or otherwise to support our clergy?
Thank you. The question is, what can Linworth United Methodist Church or any local congregation do to tangibly support their clergy? I think the answer, thank you so much for coming. I think the answer is encourage your clergy to take all of their vacation time. When they take their vacation time, don't bug them. Especially in a church like Linworth, we have 4 amazing clergy. Pastor Sarah is on vacation for 2 weeks. We don't need her right now. We need her to be well rested and energized for the work of ministry when she comes back. And you know what? When we had an issue in one of her program areas, we handled it because there are 3 other clergy and an amazing staff and tons of lay people. We don't need to bug her in that. I think also systemically, we need to continue looking at our compensation policies, not just for the clergy, but in alignment with all of our lay staff. Understanding that within the United Methodist Church, being clergy comes with some compensation privileges, and those things impact the compensation packages for lay employees. So just making sure that our compensation is fair and equitable across the board is really helpful. And I will also just say, talk to your clergy. If you're ticked off, tell them, not him, them. Obviously, I'm not him. Talk to your clergy. If you have a question about something in a sermon, send an email, meet for coffee. If you disagreed with something, ask for more information, say I disagreed. But if you're gonna leave the church, you sure as heck better tell that pastor why you're leaving, because if you just ride off into the sunset ticked off, nobody at the church except the 2 friends that you tell on the way out the door are gonna know, and then your 2 friends are gonna come and say, well, you know, Tom left because Pastor Anna wears ugly shoes. And I'm gonna say, well, how would I have known that? Not to say that my shoes, A, are ugly, because they're not, and B, that I would actually change the shoes because of that opinion, but we could have a conversation about your perception of why my shoes are important to the matter. And you laugh, but that's actually happened to one of my colleagues. So just talk to your pastors, talk to your staff, remain in conversation. You know, throughout June, we're going to be preaching about being home. And for any of you who have lived in any configuration of family, whether it's, a spouse or a child or a friend that you consider family, like, resentment just is not helpful. And for you to be angry without talking about it is poisonous. So just talk to each other, talk to us, talk to me. And I promise you're not going to say anything that's going to make me hate your guts. That's not what matters. What matters is being in community together. So again, long-winded answer. There was a question on our live stream. Is there going to continue to be a reconciling ministry movement in the United Methodist Church, or is the remaining affiliated essentially making the issue spoken for? So where do you see the conversation for inclusion going in the movement? Thank you. That's an amazing question. And the answer is, and I've seen this articulated by Reconciling Ministries Network as a whole, that just when whatever disaffiliating process is implemented and there are churches who have chosen to disaffiliate, does not mean that full inclusion and justice has been achieved. So there will still be work to do. The Reconciling Ministries Network is still committed to doing that work, and also committed to looking at the intersections of what work we need to continue doing as far as anti-racism work, anti-sexism work, continued LGBTQ inclusion, broadening the conversation beyond this really narrow same gender definition of diversity and human sexuality. So the short answer is no, the work is not done. The statements aren't going to be officially made and book closed, we're done with it. There will still be work to do after some folks choose to disaffiliate. So that was a great question. Thank you for asking it. Other questions? All right, well, I will stick around for as long as you would like to be here. If you have other questions that you would rather privately ask, I'm happy to answer those. I just want to say what an immense privilege it is to be one of the pastors here. And I will say narratively, in this last couple of months has been the first time in a long time that I think I would have been really genuinely devastated if Bishop Palmer had called me and told me I was moving. Not because I didn't love you all beforehand, but because I'm an itinerant Methodist pastor who understands that I could be moved at any time. And I know when that call comes, it will happen. But in these last months of us coming together after the pandemic, as I walk in Worthington and get to know our neighbors here, as my kid is back at LCC, all these things, I really am feeling a genuine sense of being in community here, and I'm so incredibly grateful that you all allow me to continue doing that. So I will continue to do my best to lead you well, to give you as much information as possible, and to pray for you all every single day. What I ask is that you return the favor and pray for your clergy every single day as well. And so with that, I will send you out into the world in the peace of Jesus Christ this night that is a community of Linworth and beyond. And remember that you are called to share that peace and love of Jesus Christ with each and every person you meet. So thank you very much for coming, and I hope you have a great night. You are so welcome.